everyone. Welcome and thank you a lot for coming. My name is Pat Madden. I'll do a brief introduction. I'm sure many of you know Brian Doyle or know his work, and if you know his work, then I think you know him. But maybe some don't, and maybe there's some things you don't know. This picture of Brian and his family taken earlier this year. He's a bit puffier than usual due to the chemotherapy. As he always said, he was a dad, a husband, son, brother, friend, citizen, then editor, then writer, in that order. Brian Doyle was amazed by everything. You know how Jesus said that we should become as little children, probably because of their capacity for wonder and their eagerness to learn? I don't think Brian ever outgrew that. His antennae were always up. He wanted to share laughter and joy with everyone. He would not accept depravity. He believed firmly against a barrage of evil evidence in moral evolution. He thought that stories are food and that essays are the form of writing closest to the heart. He saw love and grace everywhere. He believed that attention is a form of prayer. Just about every good and cool thing is a form of prayer. He was unabashedly spiritual, sometimes sentimental, and sometimes even didactic. He got away with it all. He had more energy and optimism than anyone I've met. He was what he wrote. To read him is to know him. He listened voraciously and wrote as if our lives depended on it. He edited the University of Portland's magazine for 25 years and wrote occasional pieces for Catholic publications. But his first book, which he shared with his father, was published only during his 40th year. His first solo book came out 3 years after that. From then, little by little, like a single-gear cyclist in a velodrome, he picked up speed and wrote a crescendoing number of books, including, at last count, 2 short story collections, 6 novels, including one published this year, a novel of Robert Louis Stevenson. Stevenson never got around to it, so Doyle wrote it for him. And 20 collections of variously styled nonfiction, some of it in long form, most of it in essay form, some in prayer form, and some of it, as he called, proems, including 2 just published this year, posthumously, in fact. And my favorite of all his books, published in 2003 first, called Leaping, which was reissued 10 years later and now looks like this. These last 3 we'll have for sale after the reading, and I encourage you to buy some books, not for Brian's sake, of course, but for yours. He was in Best American Essays more than any other writer except one. That's Cynthia Ozick. And these are the titles of those essays. He found out, oops, let me not go there yet. He found out less than a year ago that he had cancer. And though he began treatment and did all the doctors suggested, he passed away on May 27th of this year. As he was dying, he asked friends simply to be tender and laugh. So it is that we gather today, sure to laugh as well as cry. I should mention that our celebration is Plan C. Initially, after realizing he hadn't been out for a few years, we'd hoped to have him here personally. I proposed the plan just before he learned about his cancer. Once that happened, I suggested maybe he could Skype in and do a reading from afar, and he was, I think, prescient enough to realize that wouldn't be possible either. But he gave his blessing on the plan we have for today, which is to read his work, some of the friends and writers that he's touched, and also to watch some video of past readings that he's done here at BYU. We'll see some of his greatest hits as well as some more obscure pieces. I want to mention that I've always been uncomfortable with the silence between pieces at readings. And since here we'll be transitioning between video and different writers, I invite you, exhort you, and if you're in my class, require you to applaud wildly between pieces. When Brian first came to BYU in 2005, I introduced him saying that when I grow up, I want to be just like Brian. And I still want that. This man has broadened my perspective and deepened my joys. He's truly changed my life. I love him. I hope he'll have a similar effect on you. So please welcome, we'll start with a video, Brian Doyle.
Now let me cut right to the chase. I detest lectures, and they seem very authoritarian. And the fact that I'm standing and you're sitting, and I'm old and you're young, and I'm wearing my cool black sweater and you're not, you know. So to cut right to it, I just want to have a meeting, like a team meeting, really, of sort of people who are addicted to and alert to and awakened by stories, people who need stories. We all need stories. It's the greatest food there is. If we don't have any stories, we'll starve. So I want to have like a story team meeting, okay? So I get to read some of my stories because I have my cool black sweater and you don't. But I really would like to just sort of focus all in the same direction. When people are gathered together in a room, sometimes something happens, and it has nothing to do with the person in the front. It has everything to do with us sort of pointing our heads and our hearts in a certain direction. And so, you know, in a funny way, could we like dedicate an hour? Could we do that? I'm horrified and terrified at this age and stage by how many injured children and how many terrified children there are. You know, I feel like as a society and a people and a species, we say one thing about children and we do another. And there's so many frightened children, and they're so holy. And it's their world to come, you know? They're why we're here. You're why we're here. So in a funny way, let's all point our hearts toward kids who are afraid. You know, all around the world, there are little kids scared. What an awful thing. You know, and who knows what shape prayer takes? Maybe this is a big, funky, collective prayer. You know, let's think of it that way. I can say that because I'm Catholic. So, some business matters. A, thank you, Brigham Young, for having me. How brave and foolish of you. You know, second, thank you to my friend Patrick Madden. I hope you understand here at BYU how much Patrick has resurrected and resuscitated and brought the essay back up to the glory that it deserves. It is the greatest form. And I say that to all the poets and novelists in the audience. Stick it, poets and novelists. So, thank you for having me. Also, you don't know me from a hole in the wall, and I don't know you. And chances are good that our roads are not going to cross much in the years to come. So thank you for your attentiveness. It is the greatest gift. The woman who married me, she's a little tiny woman, very odd and confusing. I'm very mystified. After 23 years of marriage, I don't know anything about marriage. But she says, witness is the great secret. Witness, to see each other clearly. And that's I think it's the great human endeavor. It's the great human gift to just see each other clearly, to just witness each other. It's so sweet and holy and so hard, you know? You want to be as naked emotionally as you can, as much as you can. You can't do it all the time because it would be like being an electric wire quivering all the time. You would burn out too early. But to do it for a little while, to witness each other. So thank you for your attentiveness. It's the greatest gift that you could possibly give me. So.
A sin. Committed a sin yesterday in the hallway at noon. I roared at my son. I grabbed him by the shirt collar. I frightened him so badly that he cowered and wept, and when he turned to run, I grabbed him by the arm so roughly that he flinched. And it was that flicker of fear and pain across his face, the bright, eager, holy, riveting face I have loved for 10 years, that stopped me then and haunts me this morning. For I am the father of his fear. I sent it snarling into his heart, and I can never get it out now, which torments me. Yes, he was picking on his brother, and yes, he'd picked on his brother all morning, and yes, this was the culmination of many edgy incidents already, and no, he hadn't paid the slightest attention to warnings and remonstrations and fulminations, and yes, he had been snide and supercilious all day, and yes, he had deliberately done exactly the thing he had specifically been warned not to do for murky reasons, but still, I roared at him, and I grabbed him, and terrified him, and made him cower. And now there is a dark, evil wriggle between us that makes me sit here with my hands over my face, ashamed to the bottom of my bones. I do not know how sins can be forgiven. I grasp the concept. I admire the genius of the idea. I suspect it to be the seed of all real peace. I savor the Tutus and Gandhis who have had the mad courage to live by it, but I do not understand how foul can be made fair. What is done cannot be undone. And my moment of rage in the hallway is an indelible scar on my son's heart and mine. And while my heart is a ragged old bag after nearly half a century of slings and stings, his is still new, eager, open, suggestible, innocent. He has committed only the smallest sins of a child, the halting first lies, the failed test paper hidden in the closet, the window broken in petulance, the stolen candy bar, the silent witness as a classmate is bullied, the insults flung like bitter knives. Whereas I am a man, and have had many lies squirming in my mouth, and have committed calumny, and far too often evaded the mad, ragged Christ, ignored his stink, his rotten teeth, his cloak of soggy newspapers, his voice of broken glass. No God can forgive what we do to each other. Only the injured can summon that extraordinary grace. And where such grace is born, we cannot say, for all our fitful genius and miraculous machinery. We use the word God so easily, so casually, as if our label for the incomprehensible meant anything at all. And we forget all too easily that the wriggle of holy is born only through the stammer and stumble of us, who are always children. So we turn again and again to one another and bow and ask forgiveness and mill what mercy we can muster from the muddle of our hearts. The instant I let go of my son's sinewy arm in the hallway, he sprinted away and slammed the door and flew off the porch and ran down the street, and I stood there simmering in shame. Then I walked down the hill into the laurel thicket as dense and silent as the dawn of the world, and found him there huddled and sobbing. We knelt in the moist green dark for a long time, not saying anything, the branches burly and patient. Finally, I asked quietly for his forgiveness, and he asked for mine, and we walked out of the woods hand in hand, changed men.
A note on ironing boards. Your mom had one. My mom has one. We have one. You have one in the pantry or in the closet or in a corner of the mudroom next to the surfboards. Most people still have one somewhere, even if they are not totally sure exactly where it is. Even if most of the time it is the dry cleaner who irons your shirts and trousers. Even if you are sure you gave it away that time that the Girl Scouts were taking anything and everything for their epic tag sale, and you seized the chance to dump the old rusty air conditioner and the dryer that coughed and wheezed like a lifelong camel smoker, and the microwave that actually did smoke alarmingly sometimes, and those totally useless artsy forks designed by some hip, smarmy designer who smacked his lips with pleasure at his award-winning work, but no one on earth could ever actually use the fork to eat, not to mention that it looked like an emery board on drugs. Also, didn't we give the ironing board away that time? Because who uses ironing boards anymore? Am I right? No. Everyone uses them. They are stalwart and simple and beautifully designed for their purpose in life. They open like huge jackknives, and they have lovely, soft, cottony covers designed exactly for jacketing ironing boards. They are always painted that flat, utilitarian, soft blue or beige or shy yellow, the calm, unassuming colors of unpretentious domestic implements like vacuum cleaners and brooms and dustpans and mops. They are partners with their irons and often live and work together for many years. I would not be surprised to hear of iron and ironing board partnerships that lasted 50 years or more. The irons hiss and bubble and sigh, and if you listen closely, you can hear the gentle creak of the board under the moving iron and the gentle hiss of the iron at work. And if you look closely and with affection, you can savor the ironer's elbow in motion and the way the ironer leans on the board with his or her offhand, and sometimes the infinitesimal shuffle of the ironing board's feet on the wood, the linoleum, the tile. And then there is the moment of rest as the iron cools, and then the ceremonial wrapping of the iron's cord back around it like a ropey cocoon, and then the folding of the board, the creak, and the final clack and clank before it is returned to the pantry, the closet, the mudroom. The little things that are not little. The ironing board reminds you of your mother and her insistence that shirts and pants be ironed before mass and weddings and wakes, but not before parties. Yes, before graduations, but no before fairs and festivals. And that reminds you of the shirts and pants you inherited from your father and brothers, the collars and cuffs slightly frayed, and here and there a deft maternal stitch if you looked closely. For your mother was very good indeed at sewing, and would have made an excellent surgeon. And this reminds you of your grandmother and her sewing machine, which she said she had gotten from Yahweh after he stitched the stars into the sky. And a terrific job he made of that, did he not? Except you see one fall here and there because the stitches are beyond ancient, and he has no time now to replace them, being busy with the myriad sins of his children. And you will not add to those sins, will you, boy? And is that a hole in your shirt pocket? Take that shirt off right this minute. Stand fast. Don't move. There. Don't stand there like a squirrel without a skin. Put the shirt back on. See now, you wouldn't even notice a stitch if you hadn't stood there briefly naked as a nut. Away with you now in your sinless day. Send your next brother in. There's sure to be repairs to be made in that boy's clothes. The pack of you are death on good shirts. Would that we were still furred like in the old days before Jesus wore his lovely cloaks. How his mother must have worked on those.
Let's see. Well, I wrote a piece called The Mermans, and I hesitated to read it today. I've never read it before. I grew up in New York City. I was born in Queens, Irish Catholic, big Irish Catholic family. So large an Irish Catholic family, I was telling people last night at a reading, my mother's not quite sure of the names of the children at the end of the family. So she calls my brother Tommy 8, or sometimes, hey you, she'll say. Hey you, what's my name, he'll say. Ma, what's my name? what is his name? What is that one? The big one, you know. And but we grew up in a real Irish Catholic enclave, you know. And so the first time I heard the word Mormons, I heard it as my grandfather said, mermans. So I thought that you were an aquatic people. So I wrote that down. We were writing a whole bunch of stories about my grandfather. My grandfather is a very entertaining soul who used to say all the time, "Sweet mother of the mewling baby Jesus." That was one of his favorite things to say. We're like, what? You know, "I'll be hornswoggled and dipped in the honey of ancient jars." Things like, it's like, what? So I hesitated to read this because it's kind of like, it's the account of a boy growing up in an Irish Catholic enclave in New York City with not the faintest idea of what the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints was all about. And Patrick said, I can read it. Can I read this? So I don't think it's offensive, but you'll laugh that people could have been so stupid. Sorry. Here are the Mormons. Here are some things we thought were true about members of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, which of course we knew not one such person growing up in the Catholic enclave in New York City, or spotting the occasional Lutheran was a weekend sport. And there was rumor of a Jewish person somewhere in Brooklyn. And one time the brother of a friend had seen a Hindu man on the street, or so he said, but it was not the kind of guy you could totally trust when he said that. He may well have seen a rodeo rider, or a Mohammedan, as my grandfather would say. The Mohammedans. We thought, first of all, that the members of Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints were called mermans, as my grandfather said, so we thought that you were an aquatic people for reasons that were murky, considering your long affiliation with Utah, which we didn't think had an ocean, although perhaps it used to when my grandfather was young, as we said. Which is when your man Abraham Lincoln was president, as Grandpa would say. He told us that he had voted for Lincoln. It was the last Republican I voted for, boys, he said. And then it took us years to add up the numbers and realize he must have been like 190 when he voted for, you know. Also, we thought that the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints is Latter-day Saints, L-A-D-D-E-R, which was puzzling, but not even my grandfather knew what that was all about. It had something to do with Jacob's Ladder, he told us, which we assumed was a town in Utah. Also, we thought that the members of Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had to marry someone new every other week, which would lead to a lot of wet towels on the bathroom floor. Wouldn't it, Brian, as my grandfather said. But marrying more than once was not wholly unknown in our Catholic world. Mrs. Cooney in St. Rita's Parish had actually married Mr. Cooney after the death of her first husband in the war, so she was both a widow and an adult, said my grandfather, who informed me helpfully that as a female adult, she was what you would call an adulteress. My grandfather was a font of such wisdom. My grandfather would say stuff like that all the time, and we totally believed him. And so can you imagine being like 12 years old and writing on your English vocabulary paper the definition of adulteress? You know? This is why I didn't get into BYU. You know? Also, he said that the Mormons had learned all about football from the Catholics, who invented it at Notre Dame. And the Mormons were doing pretty well at the game, what with all the kids they have, said my grandfather. You know, in Mormon culture, the first kid has to be a bishop or a scout leader or something, and the second through fifth kids are trained to football, something like our system, in which a Catholic family produces a priest or a nun, a cop, a teacher, a soldier, or a sailor, after which the rest of the kids can be whatever they want, even Lutherans in some cases. In my family, it actually happened. My family, we have a nun in the family. We don't care what brand, as my mother says. We have a sailor. We have two teachers, and my mother says, it's not too late for you to be a cop. I'm like, Mom, 54. I don't think I can pass the physical test. Stand up straight and cut that beard off, and you can be a cop. Ma, come on. Also, we thought the Mormons were pretty brave, all things considered, to send their kids 2 by 2, dressed so handsomely in their white shirts and ties, into pagan neighborhoods like ours. Why you Catholic kids never dress as well as the Mormons is a mystery and a disappointment to me, said my grandfather. Those brave Mormon kids go right into the belly of Catholicism on their bicycles. And even their bicycles are dignified, unlike those silly Stingray bicycles you kids ride, said my grandfather. And those poor Mormon kids must get laughed at or worse all day long, knocking on doors of people who will mostly say vulgar things to them. But they never reply rude and vulgar, as far as I can tell, which you have to admire. You wonder if Catholic kids like you in this house would use the foul and vituperative language I have heard you and your brothers use, which I will not tell your mother about if you'll be a good boy and go get your grandfather one of those cigars your grandmother has for unknown reasons forbidden in the house. He used to do this all the time to us. She can be a stern woman, your grandmother, bless her heart, but you can't hold it against her because her great uncle married a Lutheran, you know. That was a mixed marriage. No, it was not misogyny, Brian. That's the wrong. And they're stern and demanding people, the Lutherans, given to nailing their opinions on church doors, ruining perfectly good wood. You wouldn't see the Mormons hammering their opinions on a beautiful church door. No, you wouldn't. Fine people, the Mormons. Amen.
Hoyas veladoras. Consider the hummingbird for a long moment. A hummingbird's heart beats 10 times a second. A hummingbird's heart is the size of a pencil eraser. A hummingbird's heart is a lot of the hummingbird. Hoyas veladoras, flying jewels, the first white explorers in the Americas called them. And the white men had never seen such creatures, for hummingbirds came into the world only in the Americas, nowhere else in the universe. More than 300 species of them whirring and zooming and nectaring in Hummer time zones 9 times removed from ours. Their hearts hammering faster than we could clearly hear if we pressed our elephantine ears to their infinitesimal chests. Hummingbirds, like all flying birds, but more so, have incredible, enormous, immense, ferocious metabolisms. To drive those metabolisms, they have race car hearts that eat oxygen at an eye-popping rate. Their hearts are built of thinner, leaner fibers than ours. Their arteries are stiffer and more taut. They have more mitochondria in their heart muscles, anything to gulp more oxygen. Their hearts are stripped to the skin for the war against gravity and inertia, the mad search for food, the insane idea of flight. The price of their ambition is a life closer to death. They suffer more heart attacks and aneurysms and ruptures than any other living creature. It's expensive to fly. You burn out. You fry the machine. You melt the engine. Every creature on Earth has approximately 2 billion heartbeats to spend in a lifetime. You can spend them slowly, like a tortoise, and live to be 200 years old, or you can spend them fast, like a hummingbird, and live to be 2 years old. The biggest heart in the world is inside the blue whale. It weighs more than 7 tons. It's as big as a room. It is a room with 4 chambers. A child could walk around it head high, bending only to step through the valves. The valves are as big as the swing doors in a saloon. This house of a heart drives a creature 100 feet long. When this creature is born, it is 20 feet long and weighs 4 tons. It is way bigger than your car. It drinks 100 gallons of milk from its mama every day and gains 200 pounds a day, and when it is 7 or 8 years old, it endures an unimaginable puberty. And then it essentially disappears from human ken, for next to nothing is known of the mating habits, travel patterns, diet, social life, language, social structure, diseases, spirituality, wars, stories, despairs, and arts of the blue whale. There are perhaps 10,000 blue whales in the world, living in every ocean on Earth, and of the largest animal who ever lived, we know nearly nothing. But we know this: the animals with the largest hearts in the world generally travel in pairs, and their penetrating, moaning cries, their piercing, yearning tongue can be heard underwater for miles and miles. Mammals and birds have hearts with 4 chambers. Reptiles and turtles have hearts with 3 chambers. Fish have hearts with 2 chambers. Insects and mollusks have hearts with 1 chamber. Worms have hearts with 1 chamber, although they may have as many as 11 single-chambered hearts. Unicellular bacteria have no hearts at all, but even they have fluid eternally in motion, washing from one side of the cell to the other, swirling and whirling. No living being is without interior liquid motion. We all churn inside. So much held in a heart in a lifetime. So much held in a heart in a day, an hour, a moment. We are utterly open with no one in the end. Not mother and father, not wife or husband, not lover, not child, not friend. We open windows to each, but we live alone in the house of the heart. Perhaps we must. Perhaps we could not bear to be so naked for fear of a constantly harrowed heart. When young, we think there will come one person who will savor and sustain us always. When we are older, we know this is the dream of a child, that all hearts finally are bruised and scarred, scored and torn, repaired by time and will, patched by force of character, yet fragile and rickety forevermore, no matter how ferocious the defense and how many bricks you bring to the wall. You can brick up your heart as stout and tight and hard and cold and impregnable as you possibly can, and down it comes in an instant, felled by a woman's second glance, a child's apple breath, the shatter of glass in the road, the words, "I have something to tell you," a cat with a broken spine dragging itself into the forest to die, the brush of your mother's papery ancient hand in the thicket of your hair, the memory of your father's voice early in the morning, echoing from the kitchen where he is making pancakes for his children.
Nobody cannot be saints. Some weeks ago, I received a letter from a girl, age 11, in Korea. She lives by the sea. At her school, there's a shelf with books published in the languages of English, she wrote to me. And one day, she lifted up one of those books up and away from its companions on the shelf, perhaps struck by the bright golden spine, and she read it in 2 days. And then she sat down to compose an electric letter to the author, as she said, whose electric address was in the back of the book. Good thing for that, sir. Dear Mister, she wrote, your book gave me such wise lessons. I learned new things about saints and also how to love. I learned to bend our hours into acts of love, to love not only sweet friends and family, but slimy enemies and fatuous fanatics and my brother. Well, honestly, mister, I used to love only my dearest people, such as friends and family. But how about my enemies? I used to be hostile to them. I just acted mean to them, not even thinking about how they would feel. But now I truly recognize that saints are here and saints are us. We, the people, used to be stupid looking for saints when they were living right here. But saints are us. Nobody cannot be saints. I now realize that. Thank you for writing fabulous. Your book is the best one I have read so far, and the first. I believe that's what you call a left-handed compliment. Of course I wrote back. What sort of man would not write back? I wrote back at length. I wrote about joy and amazement and grace under duress. And I wondered what the other books on the shelf were. I wondered what her city smelled like early in the morning in those last few minutes before the sun rose over the lip of the sea. I wondered what fish were in her sea. I wrote about the way it seemed to me that the most saintly and amazingly riveting holy people I ever met were all liable to laughter and had egos so tiny you couldn't find them with the most powerful microscope. I wondered what other books she was reading. I wondered how my books had found its way from America to a shelf of books in the languages of English in the city of South Korea. She wrote right back, "Thank you very much for giving me your response." Everything has exclamation points after it with this kid. You never read a more excited email in your whole life. I was full of excitement to open your electric mail. I love your phrases. I will keep them in my mind. I want to read your books more. I want to read another second book. Are there more books that you wrote? I feel warm from your letter. Probably the highest compliment I ever got. I feel warm from your letter. Of course I wrote back. What sort of man would not write back? I wrote back at length. I wrote about the subtle pleasure of firing a torrent of words and stories into the air and having them land in our heart by the sea on the other side of the world. I wrote about how stories matter more than we understand, and stories are prayers of unbelievable power. And stories are food, and if we have no stories, we starve. And how we're actually walking stories. We're collections of stories. We're vast houses in which stories come and go. And if we don't listen for them and savor them and carry them in our pockets, we have nothing. For stories are how we live, and stories are compasses and lodestars. For example, the mysterious stories of the thin Jewish man who walked around telling stories a long time ago. Thank you very much, sir, came her immediately reply. We would like to read all of your books. We would like to read all the other best books ever written. How do you know that books are good? One of us wants to know. I've met saints, I replied. I've seen miracles. I have seen miracles. I was visiting a grade school recently, and a child said to me, it's always a girl. Why is it a girl? A girl, Mr. Boyle, she says, Mr. Boyle. Yeah, I have a question. You're going on about miracles and stuff. Have you ever seen any miracles? I said, yes. I saw people come out of my wife. I saw people, there were people living in my wife. And all the boys are in the back with their hats, and suddenly all the hats come up, you know. And I went off on this rant. I couldn't control myself. But, I saw there were people living in my wife. Okay, I saw a head come out of my wife. It was horrifying. This is my wife, little tiny woman, and out comes a head. It was like really disturbing. It was like a horror movie. I felt and that was bad enough, but then the same thing happened. She swelled up and looked like the cosmic model, and we bought a pup tent for her to wear during her pregnancy, you know, and then two more people came out, It was like a joke. One comes out, and I thought, okay, we're done. And then out comes another one. It was like, is this ever going to end? Because I'm really tired. You know, the woman who married me is still annoyed at me because when somebody said to it, we came home with the babies. We had 2-year-old and then twin infants, right? And we came home and somebody said, oh, wow, you know, twins. You know, how was the birth? I said, it was exhausting. I'm really tired. And they're like, not you. So, anyway. So I have seen miracles, yes. Anyway. I think everyone has saint seeds inside them. I think everyone knows this deep in their bones, but sometimes we're frightened of what that means. I think we're as easily distracted as children from what we know to be true and right. I think we're selfish as toddlers sometimes. I'm the worst of offenders in this regard, yet I attend to miracles and saints. I've seen saintly sides in the most unsaintly people you can imagine. Maybe no one's a saint all the time, but everyone's a saint some of the time. Maybe saintliness is difficult and troublesome. Maybe that's the point of saintliness, to cause a ruckus. Maybe the word saint is just a label and we should be careful of trying to define or limit something so glorious and generous, like the coherent mercy who made us, and you, and me, and the sea. I'll send all my books to you and hope that some of my stories inside land in your heart and cause you joy. Thank you so much, sir, came her reply right quick. We hardly know how we can express our thankness to you. This is sweet. I always wanted to keep that exchange going, and so we wrote back and forth for a little while, and finally she wrote politely and said, dear sir, I really have to go back to school now. So.
Sachil the tailor. Another time I was talking to Sachil, the tailor in Boston whose shop on Chauncey Street was essentially a door with a vast and impenetrable space behind it, a wilderness known only to Sachil, who never moved from his stool by the door during working hours, and we got talking all metaphysical, as he said, about his work. Now, what you see of my work is tactile, he said. Pants, jackets, buttons, zippers, the occasional nice shirt, although not in your case. Your shirts are a despair to me and probably to your poor mother. Whereas what I sometimes think my work is holes. Do you know what I'm saying? A young man like you comes to me because a seam has burst in his jacket. And well, it should burst, such shoddy workmanship I have not seen since I was a boy. I repair the hole. I vanish the hole, you see? So my work is vanishing holes. Holes present themselves. Like that hole in the breast pocket of this awful shirt you are for some reason wearing today. What is that, Egyptian cotton? Why does someone wear such a thing? Maybe that is good for a man working in the cotton fields near Alexandria, but in Boston I don't think so. What I'm saying is that holes come and I make them go. I'm in the business of closing holes. If all was well, if all things kept their composition, then I would have no work. But that is not the way of things. The way of things is that holes open. Not just in battered old suit jackets that mismatch their pants like some young men I know go about the streets wearing for reasons that elude me, but in marriages and civilizations and tribes and clans. You can wonder why holes open. Why is the design of a universe in which things fly apart? But then remember that the work is to repair the holes, to make whole that which has fallen apart. You see what I'm saying? You smile, but I know you understand. You are the newspaper fellow collecting stories. I am only a tailor. But think, aren't all the stories you collect in the newspaper essentially cut from the same cloth? Each one is, in one way or another, a story of a whole opening or a whole closing. A criminal, such as, for example, Mayor John Hines of Boston, can wipe out my entire neighborhood with the stroke of a pen. You report this in the newspaper as news, but really he opens a hole, do you see? Then many people strive to heal the hole. Now, some people will say that the effort to heal holes is itself good. I do not agree. If I tried to repair a hole in your battered old suit jacket, for example, but did not actually do so, what good is that? You would still be jaunting about with a hole the size of a quarter gaping in your seam, embarrassing yourself and everyone you meet. A nice young man with the newspaper, but a hole in his jacket. Not to mention it does not match the pants. And this is why you are going to leave your poor jacket with me this afternoon, and I will repair the hole, and the universe will be slightly better off. A tailor cannot in 1 hour repair a hole the size of the entire West End of Boston, but he certainly can vanish a hole the size of a quarter. What kind of tailor would he be if he could not do that? Just leave it on the counter. I hope your poor mother will not see her son walking back to the newspaper office in nothing but his awful shirt of Egyptian cotton, without even this battered old suit jacket that does not match his pants. It is a good thing your pants do not have holes that I can see, and if they do have holes, do me the favor to not tell me about them this afternoon. A man can only repair so many holes in one day, and just imagine what it is like for me, a professional of long standing, to have to watch you walk away in that awful shirt of Egyptian cotton for all the world to see. I avert my eyes. Come back by 4 for your jacket.
How we wrestle is who we are. My son Liam was born 10 years ago. He looked like a cucumber on steroids. He was fat and bald and round as a cucumber on steroids. He looked healthy as a horse. He wasn't. He was missing a chamber in his heart. You need 4 rooms in your heart for smooth conduct through this veil of fears and tears, and he only had 3. So pretty soon doctors cut him open and iced down his heart and shut it down for an hour while they made repairs. And then when he was about 18 months old, he had another surgery, during which they did more tinkering, and all this slicing and dicing worked. And now he's 10, and the other day as he and I were having a burping contest, he suddenly said, "Explain to me my heart stuff," which I tried to do in my usual boring dad way, and soon enough he wandered off, I think to beat up his brother, but I sat there remembering. I remember pacing hospital and house and hills, and thinking that his operations would either work or not, and he would either live or die. There was a certain clarity there. I used to crawl into that clarity at night to sleep, but nothing else was clear. I used to think in those sleepless days and nights, what if they don't fix him all the way and he's a cripple all his life, a pale, thin kid in a wheelchair who has crises? What if his brain gets bent? What if he ends up alive, but without his mind at all? What then? Who would he be? Would he always be what he might have been? Would I love him still? What if I couldn't love him? What if he was so damaged that I prayed for him to die? Would those prayers be good or evil? I don't have anything sweet or wise to say about those thoughts. I can't report that God gave me strength to face my fears, or that my wife's love saved me, or anything cool and poetic like that. I just tell you that I had those thoughts, and they haunt me still. I can't even push them across the page here and have them sit between you and me, unattached to either of us, for they are bound to me always, like the dark fibers of my heart. For our hearts are not pure. Our hearts are filled with need and greed, as much as with love and grace, and we wrestle with our hearts all the time. The wrestling is who we are. How we wrestle is who we are. What we want to be is never what we are, not yet. Maybe that's why we have these relentless engines in our chests, driving us forward toward what we might be. Eventually, my son will need a new heart, a transplant when he's 30 or 40 or so, though Liam said airily the other day that he's decided to grow a new one from the old one, which I wouldn't bet against him doing eventually, him being a really remarkable kid. But that made me think, if we could grow new hearts out of old ones, what might we be then? What might we be if we rise and evolve, if we come further down from the brooding trees and out onto the smiling plain, if we unclench the fist and drop the dagger, if we emerge blinking from the fort and the stockade and the prison, if we smash away the steel from around our hearts, if we peel the scales from our eyes, if we do what we say we will do, if we act as if our words really matter, if our words become muscled mercy, if we grow a 5th chamber in our hearts, and a 7th, and a 9th, and become as if new creatures arisen from our shucked skins, the creatures we are so patently and brilliantly and utterly and wholly capable of becoming, what then?
One time I spent a whole day looking for people holding hands. It turned out to be one of the most amazing days there ever was. Right off the bat, I saw lots of teens and 20s holding hands, couples of every sort and stripe, but I'd expected to see that, as holding hands at that age is really a way of public speaking, you know what I mean? So that what began to knock me out all day was everything else. The 3 tiny school children holding hands as they all waited for the bus, a young man leading an old man who was maybe his dad, 2 women who were maybe 80 holding hands as they gingerly inched down the museum stairs. A guy holding out his hand to another guy as the second guy got out of a cab that was perched over a gully filled with rainwater. A dancer and a poster holding her hands out to two other dancers. A dad walking along the street with a tiny girl holding his pinky. And the dad half bent down as he walked, listening to her talking. Two girls walking along holding hands until they split by a lamppost and then reached for each other again, which was cool to see. A man and a woman coming out of a movie theater and reaching for each other without even looking. That was either cool or they took each other for granted. I don't know. But the sight that nailed me good and finished off the day and stays with me still weeks later was a boy maybe 12 years old or so with a boy maybe 9. I figured they were brothers going to school with their backpacks bouncing as they ran past, the older boy in the lead, but his hand trailing out behind him like a lifeline for the gasping kid brother. That was so cool it made me laugh, partly because you could see that the older brother was hip to the fact that they were seriously going to be late, unless they ran like crazy, but no way was he about to leave his dopey kid brother behind no matter what. But it was the younger brother's face that I can see right now, a wild, sweet face with just about everything in it, laughter at how fast they ran and worry that they were going to be late and mom would be mad, an outward intent to keep up with his brother. And maybe you'll say I'm dreaming or thinking wishful or whatever, but I swear he had a glint of mad love for his brother in his face. That kind of shining thing, some kind of absolute joy, just that they were holding hands. Well, they rocketed by so fast they were gone before I could get turned around to see if they made the bus or not, but that glint in that boy's face, that stays with me. That kid was thrilled to have a hand in his hand. And really, when you think about it, what could be cooler than that? Amen.
Pop art. In 9 years, I have been graced with 3 children, and here's what I have learned about them. They are engines of incalculable joy and agonizing despair. They are comedy machines. Their language is their own, and the order of their new halting words has never been heard before in the whole history of the world. They are headlong and hilarious. Their hearts are enormous and sensitive beyond calculation by man or machine. Their pride is vast. They are cruel and move in herds and gaggles and mobs, and woe unto the silent one, the one who looks funny, the one who speaks awkwardly, the fat one, for she will be shouldered aside. He will never get the ball. She will never be asked to jump rope. He will not be invited to the pool party. She will weep with confusion and rage. He will lash out with sharp, small fists. Yet they are endlessly kind by nature, and among them there is often an artless democracy, a linking of arms against the vast puzzle of the long people. They search for rules and rank, for what is allowed and what is forbidden, and poke the rules to see which bends and which is steel, for they wish to know their place in the world, where they might walk, what they may wear, which shows are allowed, how far they can go, who they are. They rise early in excitement and return reluctantly to barracks at night for fear of missing a shred of the daily circus. They eat nothing to speak of, but grow at stunning rates that produce mostly leg. They are absorbed by dogs and toast. Mud and jelly accrue to them. They are at war with wasps. They eat no green things. Once they learn sarcasm, they use it with abandon, slashing here and there without control and wreaking havoc. When they weep utterly from the marrows of their lonely bones. They will not speak of death, but when it comes, a dark hooded hawk on the fence, they face it without fear. They are new creatures hourly, and what you think you know of them is already lost in the river. Their hearts are dense books no one can read. They speak many languages of the body. To them you are a stone who has always been and will always be. When they are ill, they shrivel. To father them is not a brief noun, but an endless verb that exhausts, enrages, edifies, elevates, educates. I am a thinner and grayer man than I was, and closer to joy. They frighten me, for they will make a new world on the bowed back of the one I love. But they delight me, for to have loved them is to have tasted the furious love the Maker has for what he made, and fathers still and always will.
Some of you may have to leave. We have 2 more things. I've asked my daughter Daniela to do a brief reading. She was born 3 days before Brian Doyle's first visit to BYU, and we had him over for dinner. which knocked him out, that we'd have him so soon after a baby's birth. And Karina made him empanadas, which knocked him out. And he fell in love with Daniela that day. And the love grew a few years later when she drew for him this picture, which he took and then used repeatedly on flyers and posters announcing his readings and talks. And every time he did, he sent her $1. And he would exclaim gleefully that she's the only paid artist in America. He would send her birthday gifts, books, and this T-shirt she's wearing now. And when he found out that he had cancer, he called me in. Among the things that he worried was that he would no longer be around to send her dollars. So Danny will read for us in otter words.
One day I am sitting in my old body at my old desk, reading young essays sent to me by holy children of various sizes, and I can feel the joy sloshing and rising in me as their words pour in, and finally I get topped off by the phrase, in otter words. A child has scrawled this in the brightest green ink you have ever saw. In otter words, the holy parts are circled, she writes. I think maybe the top of my head is going to fly off from happiness, and what remains of my organized, mature mind sprints away giggling and mooing with pleasure. You know how it is said that human beings are the only beings who can contemplate two opposing ideas at once? It is even better than that. We can entertain lots of joyous ideas at the same time, it turns out, such as, oh my gosh, utter words. That's enough right there for hours of happy speculation, am I right? I mean, what are the otter words for trout and rain and minnows and ice and fur that has been warmed by the sun to just the right sheen and shimmer? I bet there are utter words for that. And for clumsy fishermen, and for osprey, and for mud exactly the right consistency for sliding in, and for dying chinook salmon like ancient rilled kings, and old red drift boats, and young mergansers, and huge herons, and the basso murmur of mossy boulders grumbling at the bottom of the river, and tiny querulous voices of crawdads, and the speed freak chitter of chickadees, and the fat feet of tiny kids, and the little pebbly houses of caddisflies, and the rain of salmon flies in season like tiny orange helicopters. And the holy parts, which are circled, we knew that was true. The holy parts are underlined and illuminated and highlighted, aren't they? And circled with huge honking blessed magic marker. Is that so? Sometimes I feel like the eyes in my heart close quietly without me paying much attention, and I mutter along thinking I'm savoring and celebrating, and then wham, a kid. It is always a kid, says something so piercing and wild and funny and unusual that wham, my heart opens again like a door flung open by, say, an otter, and wham, I am completely and utterly overwhelmed and thrilled by the shocking, brilliant uniform that crystals wear, and moved beyond words by the rolling sea in a woman's eyes, and I get this shriveling willies hearing my dad's gentle snortling laugh on the phone, and my gosh, have you ever seen a blue jay up close and personal? What a cheerful, arrogant street criminal it is, all blue, brass, and natty swagger, isn't that so? And most of all, best of all, better than every other joy and thrill, even the very best beer, which is a very excellent thing, are kids. Sure, they learn to lie, and sure they are not as into dental hygiene as you wish they were, and my gosh, they skin their knees 9 times a day, and do things like smear peanut butter on their abraded knees just to see what it feels like, and shake flour on the dog. And so when he shakes off the flour at 1 million revolutions per minute, there will be a flour cloud in the kitchen the size of Utah. Isn't that cool, Dad? But more than anything else in the world, it is kids who make us see that the holy parts are circled. You know, and I know this is true. We forget. I think maybe we should write it down somewhere, like on the wall by the coffee pot, or in steamy words on the bathroom mirror, so that we will see it every day and remember it more, and be refreshed to the bottom of our bony bottoms. If necessary, use otter words.
I'm just going to tell you right now, Brian wanted the world to read his essays, and so we have 2 possibilities for you. At the end of the reading, we've distributed on the front table all the essays we read today and a few more. Please come and pick up for your amusement, and then, as he'll tell us in a moment, photocopy them, give them to all your friends. He really, truly wanted that. But I also think you would deeply benefit from purchasing one of his books and taking it home and reading it in your spare time. So we'll have those for sale afterwards. Here's our last piece. It's called Don and Mary. Brian often said that if his whole life were reduced to just 2 pieces that he read, he would want Leap, which we've not covered today, but I encourage you to look up, and Don and Mary. He would want those to survive. So this is Don and Mary.
So
Let's see. Let me read this before I forget. I'm telling you, you walk out of here with Dawn and Mary in your pocket and read it as you like, and then you copy it 100 times and you give it to everybody you know, because I want people to read that before December 14th, okay? Some stories matter, and if that day is only fear and horror, it's just like September 11th for me. If that's only an anniversary, then I don't think we did real well. You know, it's disrespectful to not say there was courage that day, bigger than any act of murder possible. This is bin Laden's problem. He told an old story. I got a new story. I got a story bigger than his little piddly story. His story is the old one where we'll kill people, and that will mean something. I got a story where you don't kill people, where courage and grace and mercy and forgiveness win and make murder look like the stupid little thing it is, right? So here's Dawn and Mary. Early one morning, several teachers and staffers at a grade school are in a meeting. The meeting goes for about 5 minutes when the teachers and the staffers hear a chilling sound in the hallway. We heard pop, 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 as one of the staffers said later. It's 9 o'clock in the morning in Newtown, Connecticut. Is a staff meeting, first thing, right? Principal meeting with all the staff. Most of the teachers and staffers dove under the table. That's the reasonable thing to do, and that's what they were trained to do, and that's what they did. But two of the staffers jumped or leapt or lunged out of their chairs and ran toward the bullets. Jumped or leapt or lunged. Which word you use depends on which news account of that morning you read. But the words all point in the same direction, right at the bullets. One of the staffers was the principal. Her name was Dawn. She had 2 daughters. Her husband had proposed to her 5 times before she finally said yes. And they'd been married for 10 years. They had a cabin on a lake. She liked to get down on her knees to work with the littlest kids in the school. The other staffer was named Mary. She had 2 daughters. She was a crazy football fan. She'd been married for 30 years. They had a cabin on a lake. She loved to go to the theater. She was going to retire in 1 year. She liked to get down on her knees, too, to work in the garden. The principal told the teachers and the staffers to lock the door behind her and the other staffer, and the teachers and the staffers did that. And then Dawn and Mary ran out into the hall. You and I have been in that hallway, haven't we? You and I spent years in that hallway. It's friendly and echoing when someone opens the doors at the end of the hallway. A wind comes and flutters through all the kids' paintings and posters on the tile walls. And Dawn and Mary jumped or leapt or lunged toward the bullets. Every fiber in their bodies descended from millions of years of bodies leaping away from danger, must have wanted to dive under the table. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're trained to do. That's how you get to live another day. That's how you get to stay alive, to paint with the little kids that work in the garden and hug your daughters and drive off laughing to the cabin on the lake. But they leapt for the door, and the principal said, "Lock the door after us," and they lunged right at the boy with the rifle. The next time someone says the word hero to you, you say this: there were once 2 women. One was named Dawn and the other was named Mary. They both had 2 daughters, and they both loved to kneel down to care for small holy beings. And they jumped out of their chairs and they ran right at the boy with the rifle. And if we ever forget their names, if we ever forget the wind in that hallway that morning, if we ever forget what they did that morning, if we ever forget how there's something in every one of us beyond sense and reason that snarls at death and runs roaring right at it to defend children, if we ever forget that all children are our children, then we are fools who allowed memory to be murdered too. And what good are we then? What good are we then?